Hare Krishna, devotees. Welcome to day 4 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto. Right, and we are today, we're starting chapter 2. Chapter 2 is titled, The Lord in the Heart. It's something of a further development after the first chapter, which was focusing on the universal form, particularly towards the end of the chapter. So little further development. Okay, so let's have a look at chapter 2, The Lord in the Heart, and we say there are 4 sections. First section is from verse 1 to verse 7, and we call it Following On from the Universal Form. Verse 1 to verse 7. Then the second section is from verse 8 to verse 14, and that is description of the Supersoul. Then third section is from verse 15 to verse 31, and we've called that the yogi's departure from this world. The yogi's departure from this world. Verse 15 to verse 31. And then the fourth and final section is from verse 32 to verse 37, and we call that the importance of focusing on the Lord. So there you go, devotees. So let's start with the first section, verse 1 to verse 7, following on from the universal form. So what we'll do as usual, first of all, I'll read the verses themselves, and then we'll come back and do the verses again and look at the purports. Okay, so verse 1. Well, first of all, our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Deshatarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pramunityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchikalpaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha paritanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, so verse 1. Following on from the universal form, verses 1 to 7, verse 1. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, formerly, prior to the manifestation of the cosmos, Lord Brahma, by meditating on the Virat Rupa, regained his lost consciousness by appeasing the Lord. Thus he was able to rebuild the creation as it was before. And verse 2. The way of presentation of the Vedic sounds is so bewildering that it directs the intelligence of the people to meaningless things like the heavenly kingdoms. The conditioned souls hover in dreams of such heavenly illusory pleasures, but actually they do not relish any tangible happiness in such places. Verse 3, For this reason, the enlightened person should endeavor only for the minimum necessities of life while in the world of names. He should be intelligently fixed and never endeavor for unwanted things, being competent to perceive practically that all such endeavors are merely hard labor for nothing. Very powerful. Verse 4. When there are ample earthly flats to lie on, what is the necessity of cots and beds? When one can use his own arms, what is the necessity of a pillow? When one can use the palms of his hands, what is the necessity of varieties of utensils? And when there is ample covering or the skins of trees, what is the necessity of clothing? Verse 5. Are there no torn clothes lying on the common road? Do the trees which exist for maintaining others no longer give alms in charity? Do the rivers, being dried up, no longer supply water to the thirsty? Are the caves of the mountains now closed? Or, above all, does the Almighty Lord not protect the fully surrendered souls? Why then do the learned sages go to flatter those who are intoxicated by hard-earned wealth? Verse 6. Thus, being fixed, one must render service under the Supersoul situated in one's own heart by his omnipotency. Because he is the almighty personality of Godhead, eternal and unlimited. He is the ultimate goal of life, and by worshiping him, one can end the cause of the conditioned state of existence. And verse 7, the last verse in this section. Who else but the gross materialists will neglect such transcendental thought and take to the non-permanent names only, seeing the mass of people fallen in the river of suffering as the consequence of accruing the result of their own work? Yeah, that's really very powerful indeed. Okay, so let's go back to verse 1 and go through along with the purports. So here's the verse again, verse 1. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, formerly, prior to the manifestation of the cosmos, Lord Brahma, by meditating on the Virat Rupa, regained his lost consciousness by appeasing the Lord. Thus he was able to rebuild the creation as it was before. So, okay, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that Lord Brahma is stricken with forgetfulness. And yes, but he's one of us. He's a living entity like us. So yeah, therefore he's prone to forget. Even though he did it before, he created before, but he has forgotten what he did. Just like, we learn something, we learn a language. We learn a language, like a foreign language, but then if we don't use it, we come back even just a year later, a couple of years later, and we've forgotten part, at least, of what we learned. and so many things like computer programs. Some of the subtleties we forget, and if we don't use the program for some fair period of time, we have to Google again how to do whatever it is. So yeah. But anyway, the consciousness can be revived. Even our forgotten relationship with the Lord. So that can also be revived to the point where we can remember it again. So then, if we really do it nicely, then we remember very nicely the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada mentions Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse 41, Vyavasaya Atmaka Buddhir Ekeha Kurunandana, that when you get out of forgetfulness, then you can just focus just like that, very nicely. And then once you're focused and you're really into it, then develops loving devotional service. So, but anyway, otherwise, don't forget this section we've called sort of like, or referring to it as revisiting the universal form a bit. So Srila Prabhupada mentions here how in Bhagavad Gita chapter 13 verse 14, and just in different places, the Lord says or is said to have his hands and legs everywhere. Yes, and which includes that his expansions, that's us. We are meant to assist in that process. We're meant to serve the Lord. But being conditioned souls, just like Brahma, his experience right now, we forget all these things by the influence of the material energy. We can forget so many things. It's amazing. Have you ever someone that you basically know to some degree, but then you don't see them for quite some time and you forget their name? Particularly when you got a lot of people to remember. Gosh, yeah. Things like that happen. It's all by the influence of the material energy. But this can be counteracted by really developing Krishna consciousness. So therefore, it's possible, Prabhupada makes the point, to understand liberation, that liberation means getting out of forgetfulness and engaging in our real position, loving devotional service. And Lord Brahma is prime example and being described right here. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the service of Brahma is the sample of service and liberation, distinguished from the so-called altruistic services full of mistakes and forgetfulness. Liberation is never inaction, but service without human mistakes. That's a good one. Liberation is never inaction, but what is it? It's service without human mistakes. Verse 2, the way of presentation of the Vedic sounds is so bewildering that it directs the intelligence of the people to meaningless things, like the heavenly kingdoms. The conditioned souls hover in dreams of such heavenly, illusory pleasures, but actually they do not relish any tangible happiness in such places. Yeah. How many times has Prabhupada made that point in one way or another. And Krishna makes the point in Bhagavad Gita too, that the pleasures of material existence, they're not really pleasures. They're just little blips. They're not really like really deep, rich pleasures, for a long time, or even what to speak of permanently. Yeah. So, but anyway, Prabhupada gets into it in the purport, of course, that for the conditioned souls, they don't know anything else. So therefore, what can they do? They've all got these burning desires for happiness, for enjoyment, and they don't know of any alternative than just doing sense gratification in this world. So therefore, that's what they do. But because it's so, so lacking in what they're actually looking for, then they do things like, one of the very big things they do is entertainment in the form of films, television shows, novels, all these different types of things, which are, in most cases, well, at least traditionally, when I was young, you never got a film. You basically never got a film which did not have a happy ending. It was almost unheard of. Every film had to have a happy ending. The good guys had to capture or kill the bad guys. And, if you're familiar with Bollywood, the boy and the girl always end up getting married and living happily ever after. And this sort of thing. Anything other than that, like the hero is killed at the end, is extremely rare. I mean, maybe not that it's not there, like Romeo and Juliet at the end. That's a classic. Of course, that's really old, from Shakespeare's time. But otherwise, your general movies, television shows, they all have a happy ending. They all lived happily ever after. But it's fictitious, because the actual experience practically in life is that, the boy and girl, maybe, there's probably a few challenges along the way, but then in the end, I mean, not exactly in the end, but at a certain point, yes, they get married. And then they find they don't exactly live happily ever after. Someone was telling me when we were in India, that he and his wife, the wife really wanted to have a child, but it took quite some time, several years or something. And she was thinking that it's just going to be, having a child's going to be happy days all the way, 24/7 happiness. But then she found out looking after a child is really hard work. It's really hard work. So that's the reality. But because people are not satisfied, as Prabhupada says, they're never satisfied with the available amenities on this planet Earth, be they human or just, things. They're never satisfied. So therefore, there's this massive industry of creating these fictitious movies. And, it's interesting. The movie actors are definitely at least among the most highly paid people. I mean, really highly paid. Of course, you get the business community who, that's all they do, and the politicians who just take it. But for your average, working salaried person, the movie actors, TV actors, they're very, very highly paid, millions for the popular ones. Yeah, and the people go and they pay the money to watch James Bond. Even, I forget, I read how many James Bond movies there have been, but there's been quite a number. And they changed James Bonds. When I was young, I forget Sean Connery was James Bond. But then he became too old and he was replaced by someone else, who was replaced by someone else. And now the most recent one has just given it up and is going to be replaced by another one. But the people are going to go and accept, it's James Bond, our hero, doing all the heroic stuff. It's fictitious. But because this material world is so lacking, it is so unable to really give, that rich satisfaction, therefore they turn to these other things. What is it? Rollings, the what? No, Rollings, the writer.
Okay, Rollings the writer.
Yeah, Harry Potter. And the children and the adults too get so into it. They queue up for half a day to be first. Hare Krishna. It just shows. And all these depictions of life. Anyway. So yeah, it's just, but they can't see it clearly enough that actually it's not working. Okay, anyway, we could do a whole thing just on that, but that's enough said for the time being. So now they want to go to the moon, and they're talking of going to Mars. There's a joke I read that the astronauts were doing sort of training runs and test runs out in the desert somewhere in an Indian reservation, the local, the ones who were there before who got ripped off by the white men. So they're doing all these things in their suits and all that. And some of the local people are watching. And there's one old man and his son. And the old man, and the staff are around from the movie. The old man says something to his son in the native language. And there's a group of them there. They all laugh because they understand the native language. They all laugh. So one of the staff says, what did he say? And the son says that, what does he say? That my father asks that when the astronauts go to the moon, can he write a message which the astronauts will give to the people on the moon? And the staff member says, yeah, okay. And so what is the message? So the old man writes it down and gives the message. They hand over the message, which the people don't understand, the staff. And then, so the staff say, well, what does it say? And the son says, what it says is, watch out for these people, they're after your land. So that's it. They want to go to the moon to exploit the resources there, having, made such a mess, but they'll make it worse, of this planet. So, Prabhupada mentions in Bhagavad Gita 8:16 that all the other places, they're no better than here. Don't think you're going to go somewhere else and then it's going to be fine. It's not. And at the very least, none of them are immune to birth, death, etc., even Brahmaloka. So for the conditioned soul's life here is like being on a merry-go-round. You just go around and around. And, we've all been on merry-go-rounds as children. Some of them you sit on like a horse sort of thing, which goes around. And you feel, oh, I'm sitting on a horse. It's worth paying money for. But all you do, you go around. And your parents are waiting. And then you go, oh, there's your parents. And you go around, and there's your parents. So what's the deal? There's no big deal. So, yeah. So therefore, the Vedic promises, this is the thing, the Vedic promises of enjoyment ultimately are misleading. Yeah. They're creating a certain picture, but that picture is inaccurate. And people become misled. Real happiness is only actually in Goloka. So therefore, Sukadeva Goswami is affirming here, Prabhupada says, that Maharaj Parikshit, at this last point in his life, should not hanker for those things, only for the spiritual world. All right, verse 3. For this reason, the enlightened person should endeavor only for the minimum necessities of life while in the world of names. He should be intelligently fixed and never endeavor for unwanted things, being competent to perceive practically that all such endeavors are merely hard labor for nothing. So Prabhupada, of course, goes on that the Bhagavad Dharma, or he uses the term the cult of Srimad Bhagavatam, is completely distinct, completely different from just ordinary material life, fruit of life. Even though the whole universe basically is based on the idea of making plans and arrangements to make your life comfortable. But despite that, everyone sees that it's not possible. They have experience, but they don't see anything else, so they just continue. So it's really just a jugglery of words, the whole idea about how wonderful life can be, and buy our product and your life will just be great. And it's Prabhupada says it's following the way of phantasmagoria, and the people who follow it, devotees, listen to this, those who are captivated by it are madmen. And devotees, we have all been madmen in that sense. And now we're devotees, we've got this opportunity, so we must stop being madmen. Stop looking for that sort of pleasure in the situation. So Prabhupada says, the buildings, furniture, cars, bungalows, mills, factories, industries, peace, war, or even the highest perfection of material science, namely atomic energy and electronics, are all simply bewildering names of material elements with their concomitant reactions of the three modes. Therefore, Prabhupada makes the point, the devotees are not interested. And even if the devotees are interested to some degree, they know they shouldn't be. And generally they try not to be, although sometimes it's a bit of an uphill struggle. So great kings come along and they fight and try and expand their kingdom. And ultimately there's an idea of going down in history, but then they become forgotten. So rather we should use our time constructively, really in a very conscious, constructive way for developing Krishna consciousness, rather than following material civilization, which Prabhupada says here, it is the civilization of the demons. It's true. Following in the footsteps of Hiranyakashipu. Yeah. So the devotees, the transcendentalists, are specifically warned in this verse. All such endeavors are merely hard labor for nothing. So the devotees are being warned to be fixed in mind, so that even if there is some difficulty on the path, which, sooner or later there must be, but they won't budge from their determination. So for such a devotee who's really determined to make progress spiritually, Prabhupada says, it is suicidal to intimately associate with materialists. This is all very strong stuff. Verse 4, when there are ample earthly flats to lie on, what is the necessity of cots and beds? When one can use his own arms, what is the necessity of a pillow? When one can use the palms of his hands, what is the necessity of varieties of utensils? When there is ample covering or the skins of trees, what is the necessity of clothing? That's there. It's true. It's true. Although Srila Prabhupada did not literally recommend that we do that. Otherwise, the way we're operating would be quite different. But still, in principle, there's so much truth in that. The basic point, though, Prabhupada makes in the purport is there's no need to over-endeavor for comforts. Animals don't build big houses. But they generally live healthy lives. And we don't have to live like animals. We don't have to live like animals, but our reserve energy, maintenance may have to be there. But the reserve energy should be used for self-realization. So Prabhupada makes the point, an intelligent human cannot live the life of an animal. Rather, man should try to utilize his intelligence in arts and science, poetry and philosophy. Of course, he's referring particularly to Krishna consciousness, but better to absorb oneself in that sort of thing than just working, as they say, working like a dog. Yeah. So, okay. So sages didn't live in big houses. They lived in huts, like the 6 Goswamis under different trees every night. Yeah, not every 2 nights, but every night. I mean, I used to live like, not exactly, but in principle like that, traveling so much. Wow. It was very unusual that I would spend a week in one place. It really was very, very unusual. 90% of the time, like 3 days. And it was great. Really nice. So these sages, like the 6 Goswamis and various others, living incredibly simple lives, still they gave us the most important literatures for self-realization. All our acharyas' writings. And in Varnashram, if Varnashram is followed nicely, rather than, like now just over-endeavoring in this artificial system with, inflation and all that sort of thing. Gosh, it's crazy. It's really crazy, actually. Yeah. That 1 liter of milk, when I was a child, a liter of milk was like, in South African money, less than 5 cents. How much is it now?
A liter of milk is 21, 22 rand.
Really? It's not that the milk is so much better that it's worth paying the extra money for, but it's the artificial system of life. I did a calculation once. If you invest $1, shall we say dollar, at 20%, which is not a realistic interest rate, but just for, sake of example, rate of 20% per annum compounding, and you don't pay any tax, and you just leave the money there for 100 years. How much money do you think you get? $1. You end up, after about 100 years, it's something like $6 million. If that's not artificial, from $1. Yeah. Okay, anyway. So yeah, Varnashram, if it's applied nicely with commerce or economics based on trade, 1 tomato, you get, for 1 tomato, if you grow tomatoes, you get 1 potato for, sake of argument. So after 20 years, for 1 tomato, you get 1 potato. It's immensely destructive, fantastically destructive. So, but if Varnashram is followed nicely, then when people get old, they can really get themselves together for terminating their lives in the best ways possible, voluntarily accepting renunciation. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if one is not accustomed to abiding by the life of renunciation and self-abnegation from the beginning, one should try to get into the habit at a later stage of life, as recommended by Srila Shukadeva Goswami, and that will help one to achieve the desired success. Verse 5, are there no torn clothes lying on the common road? Do the trees which exist for maintaining others... Oops. What happened? My thing disappeared. Oh, there it is. My notes disappeared suddenly. Are there no torn clothes lying on the common road? Do the trees which exist for maintaining others no longer give alms in charity? Do the rivers being dried up no longer supply water to the thirsty? Are the caves of the mountains now closed? Or, above all, does the Almighty Lord not protect the fully surrendered souls? Why then do the learned sages go to flatter those who are intoxicated by hard-earned wealth? So the renounced order, they should go here and there, door to door or city to city or whatever, have gatherings and all that, for preaching, not for just collecting from householders. And actually, Prabhupada makes the point, the genuine sannyasis should be maintained by the householders. And living like that, the six Goswamis, Prabhupada says, their foremost duty was to hold learned discourses, in Vrindavan, near Radha Damodar. So Prabhupada says the pseudo-sannyasis, the impersonalists, and those who are just trying to live a sort of comfortable existence at the expense of others without really giving the others what they need. Prabhupada says they're a disgrace, and such mendicants are in abundance in Kali Yuga. So the sannyasis should depend on Krishna. Krishna will dictate to the animals not to attack. Example of Haridas Thakur with the snake, if you know that example. He was sharing a cave with a snake, and the local people wanted him to get out because it was dangerous. But he said, no, it's okay. And then they saw the snake left by the arrangement of the Lord. So verse 6, thus being fixed, one must render service unto the Supersoul situated in one's heart, and by his omnipotency, because he's the almighty personality of Godhead, eternal and unlimited. He is the ultimate goal of life, and by worshipping him one can end the cause of the conditioned state of existence. So Prabhupada makes the point, all living entities are serving, because that's our constitutional nature. But in material life, it means we're serving our relatives and the boss and the government. That's not going to help us. It's all illusion, like mirage in a desert. But Prabhupada makes the point, the fact that there's no water in the mirage doesn't mean there's no water anywhere. One can find it if one looks in the right places, not in the desert. So, the prospect of happiness in this world, it's like a mirage. We're not going to really find it here. We got to know where to look for it, and then we can find it in Krishna consciousness. So the mother, Prabhupada gives an interesting example. The mother loves the child, although as the child grows up, the child becomes detached from the mother, but the mother remains affectionate. Usually. Similarly, we left Krishna, we forgot Krishna, but Krishna has remained loving towards us, even though we've become independent in these artificial ways. So Krishna's in the heart. We don't need to go anywhere to find Krishna. Doesn't mean we shouldn't go to the temples, because the Lord's there also. But we don't need to, like people working, go all over the place in order to make money. So yeah, even though the Lord is everywhere, for common people, the temples are very important because they help people to focus nicely on the Lord, which is not so easy in other places. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if we want at all to end this anomaly of a godless civilization, we must follow the principles of revealed scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam and follow the instruction of a person like Sri Shukadev Goswami, who has no attraction for material gain. Verse 7, who else but the gross materialists will neglect such transcendental thought and take to the non-permanent names only, seeing the mass of people fallen in the river of suffering as the consequence of accruing the result of their own work? Yeah, the thing is, it's so obvious if we have eyes to see that material life, it just cannot give us what we're looking for. It's so obvious. But unfortunately, people are conditioned so they can't see it clearly enough. In popular music, there's a whole field called the blues, and it's all about how life is bad. That's what it is. It's all about how life is bad. But still, even the blues singers, they can't really see it. Yeah, so we've got to engage our minds in devotional service. The idle mind is a devil's workshop. Wrong thinking can and will lead to disaster. We shouldn't get into demigod worship. We should always be absorbed on the transcendental platform. And Prabhupada concludes the first paragraph by saying, in the previous verse it suggested that one should think of the Supersoul, which is one step higher than the impersonal thought of Brahman, as it was suggested in the case of contemplating the Virat Rupa of the personality of Godhead. So there's a second paragraph here. Intelligent people who can see properly, they can see the condition of the conditioned souls wandering about. Yeah. They can see all these things. And there, Prabhupada says, there is an everlasting belt of water called the river Vaitarani at the entrance of the plutonic planet of Yamaraj, who punishes sinners in different manners. So after being subjected to that punishment, they're put in different bodies due to their past deeds, some in heaven, some in hell, but they're all prisoners, just different grades. But the Lord is impartial. He gives protection to those who take shelter of his lotus feet. Okay, that's the first section. Let's go on to the second one. And it's the description of the Supersoul from verse 8 to verse 14. Let's just read through the verses. Verse 8, others conceive of the personality of Godhead residing within the body, in the region of the heart, and measuring only 8 inches, with 4 hands carrying a lotus, a wheel of a chariot, a conch shell, and a club, respectively. 9, his mouth expresses his happiness, his eyes spread like the petals of a lotus, and his garments, yellowish like the saffron of a kadamba flower, are bedecked with valuable jewels. His ornaments are all made of gold, set with jewels, and he wears a glowing headdress and earrings. Text 10, his lotus feet are placed over the wells of the lotus-like hearts of great mystics. On his chest is the Kaustubha jewel, engraved with a beautiful calf. And there are other jewels on his shoulders. His complete torso is garlanded with fresh flowers. Verse 11, he is well decorated with an ornamental wreath about his waist and rings studded with valuable jewels on his fingers. His leglets, his bangles, his oiled hair, curling with a bluish tint, and his beautiful smiling face are all very pleasing. Verse 12, the Lord's magnanimous pastimes and the glowing glancing of his smiling face are all indications of his extensive benedictions. One must therefore concentrate on this transcendental form of the Lord, as long as the mind can be fixed on him by meditation. Verse 13, the process of meditation should begin from the lotus feet of the Lord and progress to his smiling face. The meditation should be concentrated upon the lotus feet, then the calves, then the thighs, and in this way higher and higher. The more the mind becomes fixed upon the different parts of the limbs one after another, the more the intelligence becomes purified. Text 14, last verse in this section. Unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and material worlds, he should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. All right, let's see, where are we? Verse 8, 7, 8. Others conceive of the personality of Godhead residing within the body, in the region of the heart, and measuring only 8 inches, with 4 hands carrying a lotus, a wheel of a chariot, a conch shell, and a club, respectively. Let's have a look at the purport. So, of course, the Supersoul is being described. In humans, he's 8 inches tall. In the atoms, he's not 8 inches tall, or in the little living entities. And who knows, in the elephants and the whales, maybe he's bigger than 8 inches tall. Doesn't really need to be to do what he wants to do, but maybe. But anyway, Prabhupada makes the point, in the human species, Prabhupada says, is meant to expand from the ring finger to the end of the thumb. I think like that. If that's the ring finger. I don't know which is. It's that one. Yeah, okay, from there, it's sort of 8 inches or something. Yes. So the form who has these symbols, the lotus, etc., is known as Janardhan, the Lord who controls the masses. Of course, there are many other forms of the Lord depending on the positions of these symbols. 24 are mentioned. 24 are mentioned. Yeah, not right here, but in general. Lotus, conch shell, etc. And chakra and club, but you get other things too. So each one of those forms has his own planet in Vaikuntha, and there are many hundreds of other forms, each of whom has his own planet. So there the Lord exists as Purusha, the male enjoyer. Although you can't compare him to any male form in this world. So all other forms, Prabhupada says, all other forms are Advaita, non-different from one another. Yeah, they're all Advaita in the sense, Advaita, not two. They're all, even though there's hundreds, thousands, an unlimited number ultimately, but they're all essentially the same. And you can't really distinguish between them in any sort of clear way. Okay, verse 9. His mouth expresses his happiness. His eyes spread like the petals of a lotus, and his garments yellowish like the saffron of a kadamba flower, are bedecked with valuable jewels. His ornaments are all made of gold, set with jewels, and he wears a glowing headdress and earrings. Verse 30. Verse 30, what am I saying? Verse 10. Verse 30. His lotus feet are placed over the wells of the lotus-like hearts of great mystics. On his chest is the Kaustuba jewel, engraved with a beautiful calf, and there are other jewels on his shoulders. His complete torso is garlanded with fresh flowers. So there's a short purport here. The last couple of verses, there weren't purports. So basically, Prabhupada makes the point that his ornaments, flowers, clothes, and all various decorations, should be considered to be identical with him. None of them are made of material ingredients. If they were, they wouldn't be decorating the body of the Lord. So like this, in the spiritual world, spiritual varieties are also distinguished from material varieties. So there you go, devotees. We'll carry on tomorrow from verse 11. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.